Couples therapists, without breaking confidentiality, what are some relationships that instantly set off red flags, and do you try and get them to work out? Relationship therapist here. One of the biggest red flags I see when working with a new couple is when they've totally forgotten the good. Part of relationship therapy is reconnecting a couple with what they like about each other, what initially attracted them to each other, and what the positives are between them. When people come in and they've been so unhappy for so long that they actually can't remember what it was like to be in love or to even like each other, they're just about hopeless. You don't have to be happy for therapy to work, but if you can't even reminisce about the good times, then the good times are probably over. If you find yourself in this situation, check out Hold Me Tight by Dr. Sue Johnson. She gives some solid explanations of how people get into this cycle, as well as some suggestions on how to try and navigate it. Child and family therapist here. Not exactly couples therapy, but there are key family dynamics that set off red flags for interpersonal relationships within a family, whether it is between parents, parents and kids, or simply kids. The most important piece comes from invalidation. This comes in many forms, from gaslighting to just simple denial of another's opinion. Most of the time one or both parties are simply trying to be heard on an emotional level with an event or topic that was brought up, but the other party takes this as a personal attack on their ideals. We've all heard of or know people who will literally disagree with anything you say simply because you said it. That's the invalidation I'm referring to. I saw a couple that was doing retaliatory cheating, and telling each other about it. When they got through their anger, they decided to call a truce and made peace. With their level of emotional maturity, I doubt it lasted. I don't know if I helped them or prolonged their suffering. It was their decision to come to counseling, so I think it was the help they wanted. Other clients realize what they really want is divorce counseling. What's the best way to behave civilly and minimize damage to the kids while we go our separate ways?
I was in couples therapy. At the end of the first session, the therapist asked us to say one nice thing about each other. I went first, said something nice about him. The therapist asked him to say something, and he replied, "My mother always told me if you can't say something nice, say nothing. So, I'll say nothing." Felt so sorry for the therapist. And yes, that's when I started planning my exit. I am now very happy in a new relationship and my revenge is to be living my best life. Very happy now.
One partner says they're seeking your services to help them determine if they want to stay together. The other partner says they're seeking your services to make it, so they stay together. Then it's about highlighting the points and allowing the person who is on the fence to decide what they want since the other person knows. I am sorry to be reading about how many people experienced being the person who wanted to stay together when their partner was unsure. I hope that, whatever happened, you have found or are finding happiness again. When one person is entirely dependent on the other, especially at a relatively young age, I mean financially and emotionally. These are typically young women, sometimes young men as well, who do not work, do not have children, stay home all day, and have no friends or hobbies outside of hanging out with their spouse. Very unhealthy, and a huge red flag. Always ends in a painful and messy breakup. Generally, we try to get them to find a friend, join a community, get a job, or volunteer, something to provide them with self-worth and personal fulfillment outside of their spouse. I'm a marriage and family therapist, and for me, an unofficial litmus test is when I ask at some point in the first few sessions, how the couple met. If there is absolutely no positive effect from either person, no one even cracks a smile, or they just give me a single sentence answer, "We met at a party," that's usually a signal they've been so unhappy so long, or the conflict is so overwhelming that they can't access those good warm fuzzy feelings from the beginning. I partly wanted to do this job because I'm a romantic at heart and love hearing real love stories, and for the most part, hearing about their first few months together is an actually fun and illuminating part of therapy. Only a few times have I seen the flat or no affected couples, and it breaks my heart every time. I remember learning in grad school that most couples who come for therapy have lived unhappily for an average of 7 years before trying to get help. They come for that first session, and if they aren't cured after that, most think that therapy doesn't work and don't come back. To anyone who may be considering individual or couples therapy as a result of this thread, go for it and be prepared for it to take some time and energy from you and your therapist. My mom is a therapist, and she sometimes tells me a little bit about her cases, nothing specific or identifying. She once came home really upset about a case and told me a little bit. Basically, this guy sent his wife in because she was having trouble with the baby. He came with her and interrupted her at basically every turn and basically told my mom his wife was bipolar. In another session, the patient admitted she almost felt angry with the baby and herself because she knew she would be a terrible mother. Her husband had been saying it since she got pregnant. My mom told me, it became almost instantly clear that the husband was manipulative and abusive, and probably trying to stop her from connecting with the child. As soon as my mom suggested she was angry with her husband and not her baby, all of their future sessions were cancelled. Constant, needless escalation. When I don't think we need this expensive thing is escalated to "you don't really love me," a major problem. It shows up quickly in therapy if you're watching for it. Mostly because the one using this to avoid accountability is almost guaranteed to play this card in relation to the therapy itself. Either I had to drag them here or they're just trying to break up with me. What they're doing is avoiding conversation about the issue by blowing it up into a bigger problem than it is, so they can make the other person respond to their feelings rather than dealing with their concerns. Someone else's response made me think of this one. When a partner raises an objection to meeting with me individually. During the first session, I share that during the assessment I like to meet with them both together and once each individually. Occasionally, I'll have partners who suddenly become very critical or suspicious about this. Asking why I do that, and is it ethical, and the classic "I've never heard of a marriage counselor doing that before?" It goes beyond curiosity or simply inquiring about practice. There is an incredulous and almost panic tone to it. And sure enough, every single time, they turn out to be some variation of controlling, manipulative, abusive.
Not my client, but I had to watch as my own roommate dealt with her fiancé. He was controlling her, physically, activities, financials, continuously dismissing her feelings, assessments, opinions. Fiancé would revert to baby talk, speaking to roommate like she was an uneducated child, daddy knows best type of gaslighting garbage, trying to hide his narcissistic tendencies behind his good church boy exterior. This was all happening in my condo while she was waiting to move out and marry him. I usually tried to stay out of their issues, but one afternoon I softly encouraged her, saying I agreed with her. She came back that night after the fiancé convinced her that I was jealous and was trying to break them up so I could have him. She barely talked to me again until she moved out. Sadly, they did get married, have 2 kids, and she's a completely isolated stay-at-home mom. I don't even want to imagine what it's like for her at home.
I'll just say that if you find yourself screaming "I'm not yelling at you," you might have a communication problem. I want to add a more thoughtful note, but I should also mention that I mainly work with individuals. Similar to what others have said, the reddest of flags for me is when clients try to get me to take sides. I can understand why people may do that every now and then during more difficult discussions, but if it happens consistently, it's a huge problem. There are plenty of reasons that people may do this, but the reality is that therapy is meant to foster cooperation between partners. Feeling like you need the therapist on your side indicates you're approaching the relationship as a competition, not a cooperative interaction, and nothing good comes from that. Also, I once had a supervisor who did a great deal of couples work tell me that it has such a bad success rate because people rarely come before the relationship has crossed the point of no return. Unfortunately, that seems to be a very accurate description. Instead of taking ownership and responsibility for their contribution to the degradation of the relationship, one or both parties simply point out an example of the other exhibiting a similar behavior. It's a red flag because it illustrates their lack of self-awareness and poor communication skills. Communication is key when trying to mend a tattered relationship, because without respectful communication the conflict recovery process can never begin. In the conflict recovery model, both parties agree to the terms under which they will communicate: no yelling, no interrupting, no "I told you so's," etc. Each party gets a chance to share how the other's actions make them feel. Then they each propose their solutions and identify where they made assumptions or where they got triggered and why. Then they identify where they're willing to compromise. Next, we create an actionable plan with deadlines, and we monitor the progress to see if the proposed solutions were effective. In my opinion, everything can go bad, but once communication stagnates, you're in real trouble. So even if you're arguing, you're still doing okay, you just need to work on how you're communicating. I'm not a couples therapist, but I recommended a couples therapist to a coworker for some premarital counseling. My partner and I had really enjoyed our premarital sessions with this super nice therapist, and when a girl from my work got engaged, she asked for his number. The day after their first session, I got a call from the girl saying, "I can't believe you sent me to this horrible, invasive, rude counselor." I was in a panic. Oh no. What happened? She explained, we went in there and sat down, and the first thing he asked was, "So, why do you want to get married?" How rude is that? How dare he? That's when I realized that maybe their relationship wasn't going to pan out. They called off the wedding a few months later, saying, directly to each other, "I don't love you. I am just here to try and like you enough to stay together." And the other person replying with, "Good. We can do that." Partners refusing to listen. Absolutely deafening themselves to a certain explicit statement. Active physical abuse and each person admitting it and trying to be okay with it. Name calling in session, and when I intervene, they both get mad at me. Complete disrespect and true contempt with each other. Yet refusing to accept their relationship is over. I could keep going. These are obvious red flags. Gottman's research does a good job of answering the opposite of this question. He studies what factors predict a couple will stay together. He has like 90% accuracy. Obligatory, not a therapist, but my own experience in therapy. My wife and I, separated now, went to couples counseling where it was a husband-wife counseling team. I thought that would be great, since it may help us open up more having a member of both sexes there. My wife was hesitant about couples counseling but agreed to try it. We had our initial session together and it was cold and difficult, as expected, and my wife said she still wanted to leave, but they convinced her to try a few more sessions to see if anything clicked as we opened up. We had an individual session the next time, and I thought it went fantastically. I gained a completely different understanding of intimacy, not sexual, but emotional and relational, and I was jazzed to start working at putting it into practice. My wife came out with tear stains and sat in her car crying before she finally left for home. We drove separately because she was coming from work and me from home. Our next appointment was another individual session. The male counselor and I were talking again, and he started digging into my expectations and desires in the relationship, what I loved about my wife, etc. He point blank asked me, "Do you feel wife is a good match for you in life, and that you want to continue this relationship?" And I was a little off put, but figured it's probably a good thing to establish that right off the bat, so I answered emphatically yes, and he just looked heartbroken and so very sad. I knew pretty well right then that we were toast. Wife admitted her affair the day before our next session and left. I'm a therapist, newer to couples counseling, but one of the flags I've seen is one person digging their heels in and not accepting any feedback or suggestions, then that person tells me and partner that they are trying. I called him out on it, said that he needed to evaluate what he's willing to do and not do. Needless to say, didn't hear back from them. Another weird one is, separating without a plan. All that's going to do is teach you how to live without each other, in my opinion. I would ask them, okay, how do you know when the separation works? I don't know. When I start missing them, I guess is what I typically hear. Good question. I doubt I have much to add that others haven't already said, but the biggest one I notice is respect. Respecting space, boundaries, feelings, interests, relationships are also important, and a lack of respect by either person for the other is going to mean big problems. I would definitely try to help them work through it, but it's hard to point out to someone that something they are doing is hurting the other. This leads to my second red flag, lack of communication. Well, they used meth together on a regular basis. They continued to cheat on one another. Fighting in front of their kids, cheating in front of their kids, and oh wait, meth in front of their kids. When doing couples work, your client is the relationship itself, not person A or B. So of course, we try to work it out even knowing in our head there's no way will these toxic people ever work this out. And believe me, I tried so hard until this thing happened that I will never forget and tell my students about it all the time. Person B was like, "Why don't you tell him, me, about you sleeping with your boyfriend?" At that point, I was just like, nah. My dissertation was finished, I had maybe a month left at this spot before leaving the state. I just told them that I was done today and advised them to seek another therapist at the front desk because I was no longer able to accommodate them. Really, I just wanted to reach over and slap the absolute crap out of the dude. Other instances where the typical one person wants to save the relationship while the other person is halfway out the door. It's really depressing actually, because you feel for that individual and they are trying, but that other person has other plans. Many of the times the other person was actively cheating and the spouse either knew or that person would tell me low-key after the session. I hated couples counseling. Y'all never came to me as a first step, only a last resort. I'm in marriage counseling. And the very first session restored hope in a relationship where the divorce was threatened in every fight. The moment hope was restored was when we both immediately owned our own shit and said we just want to learn how to love each other again. The therapist was like, "You both want to do better, you both want things to get better, we can work with this." I got the impression he had dealt with people who just want to be right, with an audience. So glad that wasn't us. The reason I'm responding is that he supported that thought, saying, some couples are doomed because they just want an audience for their resentment, not help moving past it.